a very rich class. If you can mute yourself or just be aware of that because of the background noise. If you do want to ask a question, raise your hand. There's an icon to raise hands, or if you need to just unmute and interrupt me and say, Rabbi, help, please do that because I'm going to try to go quick. And I guess I'll just say, for those of you who were on the call last week, or this is your first time, that the topic is the poetry of prayer. And the reason that I wanted to do this is because, and last week, by the way, we did the Ashrei, a very common one that most of us say all the time. We hear B'nai Mitzvah kids recite it all the time. The reason I want to do this is because prayer is so hard in Judaism. It's just really hard. It's in a foreign language. I've been with kids and B'nai Mitzvah and all of it for a long time. It's in Hebrew, and it's not just Hebrew. It's not a spoken Hebrew. Israelis, all due respect to my Israeli brothers and sisters, also struggle with reading and understanding because it's not modern Hebrew. It's like old Hebrew. It's literary Hebrew. It's like Chaucer. And so understanding it and parsing it out takes work. It really does. You need a teacher. You need to work at it. And on top of it, the imagery is old and the theology is strange. What does this say about what we believe? And so there are different ways to crack that open. But one of the ways to crack that open for people is to look at the poetic structure itself, how the verses are aligned. What is the drama, the spiritual drama that the poetry and the rabbis were trying to evoke in the process of prayer? And although the terms and the themes may be archaic for us in modernity, I think if we can at least understand how it works, how the prayers work, we can get a better insight into what the poets and the authors of the prayers were trying to get at and how we can relate to them and their experience. Okay, I'm going to recommend that if you have a prayer book, that you take it out. You might want to have one available. If I will be calling the pages of the red Lev Shalem, of where you can find it in the prayer book. I'm going to be screen sharing a lot too, like I did last week for those of you who are here. But you might want to just see visually. You might have a better association. If you're a visual learner, you'd like to see it in your own prayer book. I personally see prayer books also as textbooks. And although I try not to use a pen in my Sifrei Kodesh and my holy books, I will, just my own disclosure, I will use a pencil in the margins, not writing over the words. Sometimes, because I like to remember, that's just me. If you want to do that, I want to invite you to consider that. Or you might just want to take some notes, because this is going to go fast and furious in a certain way. And if you're a person who's been praying, today we're going to be focusing on the Kedusha. If you've been praying the Kedusha for years and years, but you never really did a deep dive into it and you don't totally understand it, and you were here last week for the Ashrei and that opened your eyes, well, today's going to blow your mind. Okay. So I don't want to oversell it, but it's going to be, I think it'll be interesting. I hope it is, because it is for me. It really is helpful for me. And the last disclaimer is that, I have taught this before. I had to go back in my notes, and there's a lot there. But this is probably the deepest and the furthest, if you will, that I've probably ever taught it in preparing for this. So we're on this journey together. And as we enter this journey, let's go ahead and say the prayer, the blessing for the study of Torah. If you know it, please feel free to say it with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu mitzotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so we're going to let everything down. We're going to focus, bring our collective consciousness together. Today, we are focusing on the central prayer of the Jewish service. What's the central prayer of the Jewish service? So you could say the Shema. That would certainly be a good argument. That's, of course, a verse from the Torah. But a written prayer by the rabbis, the prayer HaTfilah, designated as HaTfilah, is the Amidah, the standing prayer. also known as the Shmona Esrei for 18 blessings, even though there's actually 19 blessings. So we're going to look at that, and we're going to look at what is always the third of those 19 blessings, at least in the daily Amidah. And in the Shabbat, there's not 19, there's 7, but it's always the third, no matter where it appears, which is called the Kedusha, which appears in the repetition. See, we say the Amidah, and then the leader repeats it. And the Kedusha only appears in the repetition, but it also appears when we begin the Amidah together, traditionally in the Shacharit service, in what's called a Hechi Kedusha. You know what a Hechi means? A Hechi Kedusha? Hechi does not mean half a Kedusha, a half an Amidah. That's what a lot of people think. It comes from actually Yiddish, Hoichi, which means out loud, bakol in Hebrew. You do it out loud together, okay? But that's what the Kedusha is. That's what we're going to look at today. And it's a fascinating section because it's the only section of this where there is a call and response of biblical verses, a recitation of biblical verses, and then a call and response to those verses. The rest of the prayer is comprised of rabbinic authorship. And what's remarkable about those verses and this section of the Kedusha is that it puts the verses in the mouths of angels. And we are imitating the angels, which is one of the reasons that we stand still and we go up on our toes. All the choreography, I'm not going to talk about it today, but the whole thing is really an imitation of angelic behavior and how we moderns should understand this angelology. We're going to deal with, but we have to look at it first through the actual text. Okay, so let's break down a text. Let's look at some basic parts to the Kedusha. I'm going to screen share the daily Amidah, the daily Kedusha. If you look on page 293 in Lev Shalem, you can find it there, but I'm going to screen share it too. 293 in Lev Shalem, or I'm going to screen share it. Okay, here we go. Just scrolling. And Esme, if you wouldn't mind, I'm looking at you because you're my top screen. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that? You can see it well? Okay, thank you. So this is the Kedusha for weekdays. All right. And the key verse is obviously what is line 2 here. Kadosh, 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 holy, holy, holy. Indeed, the name of the prayer, Kedusha, is derived from this recitation of this verse. The Kadosh repeated 3 times. That's why it's called the Kedusha. And the verse is from, as you see here, I note, from the book of Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, and when he's called to his prophecy in chapter 6, verse 3, the verse means holy, holy, holy. Adonai Tzivaot, God of hosts, typically it's translated. The grandeur of the world is in God's glory, should be filled with God's glory. Okay, this is followed by another verse in verse 4, which we see also in the Kedusha, which is from the book of Ezekiel, chapter 3, verse 12, which says, Baruch kivod Adonai mimkomo. Blessed is the glory of God from his place. There are also other biblical verses in Kedushot, but I only am focusing on these 2 for right now because these 2 verses comprise the bare minimum of any Kedusha that appears in our Siddur. And there are several different versions of Kedushot, as some of you know, in our Siddur. But I make that distinction because there's other versions of Kedushot that are not in our Siddur, believe it or not. For example, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's a version of the Kedusha. And also in early Christianity, guys, they also had a Kedusha. And they do not include line 4. They do not include the Baruch Kavod Adonai Mimkomo line, just the Ezekiel line. But the first problem we run into, and we run into a problem right away, and I know it's a problem because I know I'm not the only one who asked the question. In fact, the liturgy itself asked the question, which is, why? Why does it say Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh? Why do you repeat Kadosh 3 times? What is that about? Why do you think it needs to say Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh? And the liturgy struggles with it. The most simple answer would be that it's repeated 3 times to indicate what's called in poetry the superlative, meaning if I call God Kadosh, I'm saying, okay, God is holy. God is definitely holy. There might be other things that are holy, but God is among those things that are holy. Then I say, God is Kadosh, Kadosh. Well, God is holy, but maybe more holy than those other things that are just Kadosh, that are just holy. And if I say holy, 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 I'm saying that God is the most holy, and there's nothing in the world that comes anywhere close to the holiness of what God is. And therefore, we regard it as the Kedusha. But, like I said, the liturgy itself struggles with it. And so, with that, I want to bring up another Kedusha. They're going to look similar, same chart. Trust me, I'm scrolling. You're going to see it's a totally different Kedusha in a second. This is called, it comes from a section in the Siddur called Uva Letzion, or sometimes in the prayer book Kedusha de Sidra. You can find it in the Lev Shalem on page 216, if you'd like to look along there. Uva Letzion, or Kedusha de Sidra. This appears at the end of the morning service, daily morning service. Rashi said that Rashi said it was implemented at the end of the morning service, this version of the Kedusha on the daily service, so that people who came late to morning minyan and missed the Kedusha might at least have a chance to say Kedusha that morning. People who go to morning minyan might appreciate that answer. It also appears at the beginning of Mincha at Shabbat, and also at Saturday night on Motzei Shabbat when we end Shabbat. And finally, this version appears in Ne'ilah on Yom Kippur, at the closing of the gates, okay? But let's look at what it says. It has this phrase here at the top, which begins, right? V'ata kadosh, you are holy God. Yoshev tilot Yisrael, you sit upon the praise of Israel. V'karazeh elzeh ve'amar. And the idea here is that, and they call this one to that one, indicating to each other. We're thinking about angels here. I'm just hinting at that. We're thinking about angels, indicating what you say. And what you say is Kadosh, 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 and so on. But then look at line 3. The text actually includes within the Kedusha here a rabbinic midrash, which tries to answer the question, why 3 kadoshes? Why kadosh, kadosh, kadosh? It gives a little midrash. It says, umekablin den miden. And they received authority, sanction, judgment, and they said, and I put them in the A, B, and C here so you can see it. Kaddish, this is Aramaic now, guys. This is the rabbis writing in their time, in their colloquial tongue. So they're going to break down the 3 kadoshes into 3 different themes or ideas. Kaddish bishmei meroma ila'a beit shchinte. Again, it's Aramaic. Kaddish is kadosh. Kadosh, God is kadosh. Bishmei meroma, in the heavens above. Ila'a beit shchinte, above in the house or in the place of God's Shekhinah. God is holy above. B, Kaddish, second Kadosh, Al Ara Ovad Givorte. God is holy on Ara, on the ground. That's Eretz in Aramaic. Ovad Givorte, where he works his great things, his greatness, his great deeds. God is holy above, God is holy below on earth. Last one, Kaddish Le'alam Ulamei Maya. God is holy, Le'alam Ulamei Maya. God is holy throughout all time. So what we see here is that the kadosh in the Kedusha, why does it represent 3 times? One answer was the superlative. Second answer was each kadosh indicates a different vector in time and space. God is holy above, God is holy below on earth, and God is holy in all time. Above, below, 3 times. By the way, I mentioned that the Christians use this verse, Kadosh, 3 times. How might you guess that the Christians might interpret 3 times of Kadosh? 3 is a big number in Christianity. It represents, of course, the Holy Trinity. So this is a direct response, rabbinic era, and deviation away from anything like that. And this resolves the question of the 3 times. But there's one other way to look at the 3 times of Kadosh. I'm just going back to the Daily Amidah here. The Daily Kedusha, line 2, the Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Just bear with me. The third common understanding of why 3 times for Kadosh is that you have groups of angels. One group says Kadosh, another group says Kadosh, Kadosh, and a third group of angels says Kadosh, 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 and Tzavot. Or, and this is the one that I want you to hold on to, one group of angels says Kadosh, like, are you ready, other group of angels, to say Kadosh? Are we ready to sanctify God? Then the other group of angels says Kadosh. Yeah, we're ready to say Kadosh. And then both of those groups come together on the same beat, on the third beat, and they say the rest of the pasuk, the rest of the verse. Kadosh Adonai Tzavot Meloch ha'aretz Kivodo. God is holy and the grandeur fills the whole world. Now, why would anybody, I'll just stop sharing for a second so I can see you all. Why would anybody divide this verse into choruses of angels going back and forth? Why would anybody even think of such a thing? It wouldn't occur to me, that's for sure. It's weird. The reason that they did this, and that it's a plausible explanation, is because during the time of the Roman Empire, one of the ways in which they would perform the ceremony of coronating a Caesar, coronating the king, to make a Caesar, they would take a significant verse from poetry or from their sacred literature, and they would divide it into 2 choruses. And then the 2 choruses would come together on the third beat and respond, and that third beat with bringing the 2 choruses together was the moment of coronation itself. And so the rabbis decided when the angels say Kadosh, 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 it's a gesture of accepting divine sovereignty. How do I know that? Because that is the way it's actually interpreted in the first time the Kedusha appears in the Siddur. Does anybody know where the first time the Kedusha appears in the Siddur? Actually occurs the first time in the first blessing of the Shema, in the Shema. You might recognize this. Let me go back to screen share. There's Uva Letzion. That's another Kedusha in the Shema. Some of you may be familiar with this. Okay. So again, the Siddur describes the angels as participating in divine sovereignty ceremony modeled on the ancient Greco-Roman ceremonies of how a king is coronated. They divide the verse in 2, come together in third. All right, let's look at it. The angels are coming together. This is the beginning. Angels are coming together, and what do they say? Et Shem Ha'el. We're now going to coronate Et Shem Ha'el, the name of God. What are we going to name? HaMelech. There it is, the king. HaMelech, Hagadol, the great one. Hagibur, the heroic or strong, powerful one. Hanorah, the awesome one. Kadoshu, he is holy. Vechulam mikablim alehem, and all of them, and each one of them, each group, mikablim, accepts upon themselves all malchut shemayim, the yoke of the kingship of heaven, zemizeh, on one and the other. V'notnim reshut zelazeh, and they tell each other, they indicate to one another, lehakdish liyotzram, how to sanctify their creator, how to claim holiness of the creator. And how are they supposed to do that? B'nachat ruach, with a serene spirit, b'safav rura, with clear speech or intelligible speech, uvnima, with pleasant melodic singing. Kedusha, holiness, kulam kechadonim. All of them come together as one, omrim b'yira, and they say with awe. So you see in this verse, you have 2 groups of angels claiming, coronating the king, HaMelech, the great one, HaGibor V'Nara, and they accept upon themselves the sovereignty of God in heaven and indicate how to say back and forth, Kadosh, how to claim the holiness of God. Now, And of course, they say the Kadosh, you see in line 2. We can see, sorry, what I wanted to point out, just checking my notes here, putting the Kadosh like this into the mouths of angels by the rabbis is basically the same thing as putting the Shema into our mouths, into the mouths of the people of Israel. How is that? Because the Shema is in a way our coronation ceremony. It's a coronation ceremony in the sense that the Shema is when we accept that there is a God, there's a God, it's our God, and our God is the one and only God. We accept that sovereignty. This is doing that with the angels. And we're going to see that play out over the course of the Kiddushot with changes, additions, finally going through Shabbat, Shabbat Musaf. Each Kedusha adds an additional biblical verse, developing that theme further. Okay, so let's return and we'll see, because we're going to have another new verse here. And then after this, I'm going to pause and take questions and comments. Okay, a new verse in verse 3. Playing this out now a little bit more. Okay, V'ha'ofanim v'chayot HaKodesh. These are the names of angels. Ofanim, don't ask me exactly what they are. Chayot HaKodesh, another type of group of angels. Birash gadol, in a loud sound and voice. Mit nasim, they elevate leumat seraphim, to the nation, to the level of the seraphim, another type of celestial angel. Leumatam, and on that level, all of them together, mishabchim ve'omrim, they praise and they say, and what do they say? Baruch kavod Adonai mimkomo, God, blessed is the glory of God from God's place. And that's the end of that Kedusha there. But again, you see two groups of angels then coming together in a third moment, singing together, praising God. Okay, let me stop the share. Stop for questions, comments, anything to catch up. You can go ahead, unmute, raise your hand. Can you see okay? Do you understand? Yeah, David.
Yeah, when you first said the Kadosh, 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 I was thinking in terms of kind of like the Yud Hey Vav Hey, past, present, and future, as the 3 times. We
should add that to the prayer book. That's very good. It's kind of encompassed in the all time. It's a time vector, right? Midrash is what you just did. Anybody else? Yeah, Tessa?
I was thinking in terms of the patriarchs, the 3 patriarchs, and how they each brought a piece of davening. So here it's encompassed in one prayer.
That's very nice too. Marilyn?
Hi, you guys. Does the text support that there are, in fact, one angel calling to? Because when I first heard Kadosh, 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 my interpretation is it's one angel trying to get the attention. Like when you say to your kids, get in the car, you kind of have to say it a couple of times because each interprets it like a little bit differently. So I'm wondering, is it in fact one to a group, the group responds and then all together, or is that?
So what stimulated for me when you were talking and asking a question is, there's 2 things, I guess there's 2, I want to separate into 2 different things. There's one is the verse, and there's the interpretation of the verse. And we can interpret and make midrash all day long and have a great time and and it all works and it's all good. And in the pshat, in the simple text of the verse, it doesn't seem like it's one angel. If you go to the book of Isaiah, it seems like it's a group and they're all in uniform doing it. Then there's that. And then there's what the Kedusha in the prayer book that the rabbis constructed and the verses and text around it is trying to accomplish in the drama of the prayer service itself. And what we are doing as how we are applying that text. And with that, they take great liberties all the time. And what they did was they identifying in that verse, they thought, hey, that's a great verse. If we're going to model this on the Greco-Roman coronation ceremony, we're going to do this not with gods and the way they did it with the Greco. We're going to bring the angels who are there based in the text, and we're going to create the same kind of back and forth, elevating the moment of divine coronation, that we are accepting on ourselves the yoke of heaven of God every single day, that God is king. We need to do that as human beings, as Jewish people, every single day, to remember who's really the boss and under whose command we are. And that is a royal and regal moment, of which we know, and you know if you come to synagogue, the Kiddush is like one of those moments where stop, don't talk, don't schmooze, stand still, hold your book. You know, if you're walking, stand where you are. It's just one of those moments where we're supposed to recognize that in the choreography and in our liturgical process. Yeah, Judy.
I'm thinking more of just the iambic pentameter of the poem, because if you do it once, it doesn't mean anything, but you need the 3 to go with the second verse.
Yeah, it's true. There's a music to it. When you have to repeat something 3 times, it's so naturally poetic. It puts you kind of into a trance, to where a mini one, where you're kind of like kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. And if you have the verse memorized, the last phrase just sort of slides off your tongue. You're in kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. And then the rest is it just is like honey. It just comes out, and there's a beauty to that, which all the more so brings our awareness to the words kadosh more and more. So let's look at the next evolution of the text, which will give us even more context, okay, to understanding what we're doing. Now that you've seen Uva L'Tzion, now that you've seen the angelic incorporation in the Shema blessing, let's look again at the daily Amidah, the one that the Kedusha that we're supposed to do basically twice a day. All right, here we are. Okay, let's just go through it line by line. See if it makes sense now. This is the Chazan. Well, the congregation says it silently, then the Chazan repeats. Nekadesh et shimcha ba'olam. We will sanctify your name forever, ba'olam. Kashem, just as shimakdishim oto bishmei marom, that they sanctify your name, bishmei marom, in the heavens above. Who's the they? The angels. Now you get it. We're going to sanctify your name just like the angels. The angels are coronating you. We're going to coronate you. We're going to crown you. Just like the kakatuv al yad nevi'echa, just like it says from your prophet, as they indicate to one another, saying, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. We're going to imitate the angels. We're literally saying that. We're going to imitate this divine court. We're going to sanctify your name in this way. Kadosh, 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 right? And then you have one other line here, and you have an allusion to the line that we had before in the Shema, where it said, Le'umatam, referring to elevating to the level of the seraphim. It's the same last few words, Le'umatam, and together, all together, when they come down on the third beat, Baruch Yomeru, they bless, saying, Baruch Kevod Adonai Mimkomo. Okay? Now, the daily Amidah, I told you always, every Kedusha includes 2 verses. This Kedusha is now going to add a third. It's going to add another biblical verse with which to interpret, which is going to open a new theme for us. And that biblical verse is in line 6, which says, it's from Psalms 146, which says, Yimloch Adonai le'olam, Elohayach Tzion, l'dor vador, hallelujah. And Adonai will reign forever, your God, where? In Tzion, l'dor vador, generation to generation, to which we all say, Hallelujah. And so that adds a section. That adds something to the verse. What does that add? Now, if you remember, we went through the three different interpretations of kadosh under Uvalet Zion. We saw the three vectors. Do you remember what the three vectors were? Where God's existence reigns? The first vector was on high. I can go there again to show you. God is holy above. We have that in our kedusha on the daily because we say we're imitating the angels where bishmei marom, on high. Now another vector was God below, and the third vector was God forever. Line 6, the yimloch and that is God will reign when? Forever. It has added this new vector of time. But what we're missing is the second one, which is God below. We have the angels above. We're imitating the angels above. They're crowning the king. We have it all time. But what about below? And so we're going to add one more kedusha, the kedusha for Shabbat, which some of you might be the most familiar kedusha for you, which is on page 161 in Lev Shalem, 161 in Lev Shalem. And we're going to see maybe that there's something there in that kedusha that the angels can't fulfill by themselves. Okay, so let's go to there. Again, if you have a question or something, just bounce in and stop me. This is the kedusha for Shabbat morning, which is on your screen. Again, page 161 in Lev Shalem. And it's essentially the same for the first couple, right? Nikadesh Shimcha, we're going to sanctify you as above, as written by your prophet, the angels one to another, kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. Then line 3 plays it out a little bit more. Line 3 spells it out just a little bit more. There's a new verse for us, not verse, but a new rabbinic line for us. So they say kadosh, kadosh, and then az bikol, then in a voice, rash, gadol, loud sound, adir v'chazak, thunderous and strong, mashmim kol, they will sound their voice, mitnasim, lifting themselves up. Here it is again, just like we saw in the version of the Shema, leumatam srafim, up to the levels of the angels, leumatam baruch yomeru. Together, all those groups will bless, saying, Baruch kavod Adonai mimkomo. God is holy from their place, from God's place. And now I put it in blue because this is a totally new concept for an Amida, for a Kedusha. We have not seen this before. The last verse said, God is blessed is the glory of God from God's place, from his place. Mim komo. So what do you have in line 5? Building off of in God's place, in his place, Mim komcha says, now in your place. In your place. What does that do? It shifts who's speaking. The line before in line 4 was the angels speaking. The angels sing in chorus. They come together, one another back and forth, lifting God up, saying God is holy in his place. But now it's Mim komcha. From your place, it's us now speaking directly to God. We're doing something different from the angels right now. And we're going to say, Mim chomcha malkeinu. We've not seen that word in our Kedusha before. We've seen melech in the Shema one, but malkeinu, our king, there it is, the coronation, crowning God. From your place, our king, Tophia, appear. In other words, we recognize that God has been made sovereign in the heavens. Great. The angels made you sovereign, God. The angels coronated you. You're the king in heaven. Great. Gegazin to Hayden. But that's not going to do it for us because we're now talking to you straight up. Vitim loch aleinu. And please, you should reign over us. Not just in heaven, but here on earth. Ki mechakim anachnu lach, because we're waiting for you. We're waiting for you, God. Matai timloch b'tzion. When are you going to reign in Zion? Please make it be soon in our days forever that you dwell there with us. We're bringing God down to earth with us. Then it says, Tit gadal v'tit kadash. You should be great. You are great and you are sanctified By the way, what do those two words remind you of in the prayer book? Tit gadal v'tit gadash. Might remind you of yit gadal v'yit gadash in the Kaddish, but it's not let God be great or let God be sanctified. It's saying, God, you are great. You are sanctified. We're not waiting till another time. We are doing it right now. Where are we doing it? B'toch Yerushalayim Ercha, in the midst of Jerusalem, your city. When? L'dor v'dor l'netzachim, for all time. Ve'einenu tirena malchutecha kadavar hamor b'shirei zecha aydav David Mashiach said. Okay, may our eyes see your rule, see your kingship. May we actually witness it as the word, as it said, of the strength of the songs of your strength in the Psalms by the hand of David, your righteously anointed Mashiach Tzitecha, as David said, because David is traditionally the author of the Psalms. This line comes from the Psalms, this verse, Yimloch Adonai le'olam, l'hayek tzion l'dor v'dor. Hallelujah. What does this mean? This blue section, this Mim Komcha section, this means that the power of God, God's power as God's known to the angels, should be known here. And when the world has been corrected, when evil and injustice no longer permeate the world and is replaced by good, that would signify God's divine rule. And that divine rule starts where? It starts in Jerusalem and Zion, and it spreads throughout the whole entire world. And we make this request of Einenu that we're going to see it in our day. And then not only are we going to see it in our day, we're going to see it starting from Zion. And this text, Yimloch Adonai, becomes the proof text for what the rabbis are trying to say and what they believe, which is that God is going to, just as David said it, God's going to reign in Zion forever and ever, to which we say, hallelujah. So at the conclusion of this Kedusha, we've imitated the angels in their coronation ceremony on high, but we also pray that it's not just limited to the heavens, but that it's here on earth, that God is not just transcendent, but God is immanent, and that we can see God's law, God's world, right here in the concretation of the divine in our lifetimes. That is what the Sabbath additional Kedusha adds. Let me stop one more time. We have one more Kedusha to look at. Am I going too fast? Is this above it? Am I breaking? Is this easy to follow? Is it hard with the, I know it's a little repetitive, but sometimes you need, I just keep me in check. Yeah, go ahead, Barbara.
It seems like in this final verse that you described, it's talking about the time of Moshiach, that we may pray every week, every day, but we're praying for Moshiach to come.
That's exactly right. Or you could still say the era, a messianic era. In other words, we're praying that when things turn to good, yes, the angels have coronated you. You are on high. You are ruling in heaven. There's no question God's way is the way in the celestial realm. We want that here on earth. And when that happens here on earth, we will know that that is the divine, that is the sign of the Mashiach. When God's rule, when God's will becomes fulfilled on earth, when we start to see evil transformed into good, we will know that your rule is beginning to spread from Zion, Jerusalem, all the way out to the rest of the world. And we want to see that today and last forever. So you've got above the three vectors, below, forever. And now you have the angels participate, but we're also participating. Did somebody else have a hand raised? All right, David. Sorry, you got to unmute.
Okay, go ahead.
Rabbi, this reminds me of what happens above is mirrored below.
Got it. You got it. And who is below? You are. I am. We make it happen. We have to do it. We have to bring what's being done above, below. And when do we do that? It's not enough in the Shema. We got to join, because that's just us. That's just below. We got to join the angels. And we join them by imitating them, reminding ourselves that they're doing it and we're doing it together. And that's what the Kedusha is. All right, David?
Yeah, I was going to say that the Orthodox sort of imitate the angels more than we do in a conservative synagogue, since the angels seem to be shouting out, without getting to sing together.
I don't know what you mean by that. Exactly. But I think that at Kol Shofar, we do a very nice job of call and response. Okay, you ready for the last Kedusha? And then my little drash at the end? Okay, so let's look at the last Kedusha, which is the Musaf Kedusha for Shabbat. There's a lot of people say, well, you don't need to do Musaf. After you see this thing about the Kedusha for Shabbat, you're gonna say, no, you have to do Musaf now. So it's on page 187 in the Lev Shalem, if you're following along. Okay. Here's something that might be new to some of you, or you might need to be reminded. Did you know there's two different versions of the prayer book? There's an Ashkenazi and a Sephardi. And those differences sometimes are significant. Sometimes they're very minute. Sometimes they're about order, or more or less, but sometimes they're significant. If you look at the Musaf Kedusha here for Shabbat, line 1, it basically is the same stuff we've been talking about, slightly different words. Na'aritzcha v'nakdishcha. We're going to laud you, extol you, and sanctify you. This is a little strange. It's just to keep the mystery, I think, alive. It doesn't change the meaning. Kesod siach sarfei kodesh. Kesod, like the secret sound voice, the secret discussion of the seraphim, the holy seraphim. Hamakdishim shimcha b'kodesh, that sanctify, that coronate you, that crown your name in holiness, as it's written, kakatuv vayad neviecha, karzel zevimar. Now that's the first line in the Ashkenazi Siddur for Musaf Shabbat. That's what we say. In the Sephardi, it's slightly different. It's this orange one that I put here for you. The opening line of the Kedusha Musaf Shabbat in Sephardi says, and you might recognize this, by the way, from High Holiday Liturgy, Keter yitnu lecha Adonai Eloheinu. I mean, it can't get more direct. A crown they will give you, Adonai, our God. Who's going to give it to you? Melachim hamonei ma'ala, the angels that are high above. Now listen to this. Im Amcha Yisrael, with the people Israel. Kvutze mata, who's the group below? Who said high and below? I mean, it's right there in that one line. They're going to crown you on high with the angels. They're going to crown you below together. And yachad kulam, together. They're all kedusha lecha. They're going to make you holy. Yishal eshu, from the word shalosh, 3 times. They're going to do the threefold kedusha for you. Kadavar ha'amor al yad neviecha. Just as it said, your prophet, they point karazeh, so forth. Kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. All of this is familiar, but wow, what a blatant expression of exactly what we're talking about, what this process is of aligning above, below, and all time. And in the form of the call and response, the threefold saying of Kadosh, one group, another group coming together on a third beat to say Kadosh Adonai Tzivot Melech Haaretz Kivodo. Now, line 3, you have a whole new line, which takes this a little bit different place. Kivodo Malei Olam, the world is filled with his glory. And that gets really weird here. Weird thing. Mishartav, that's like Sherut, servants, assuming holy servants, assuming angels. Mishartav Shoalim, your servants, ask. Zelazeh, they ask each other. Aye mekom kivodo. Where is the place of God's glory? Umatam, what does this mean? What does it mean? Where's the place of God's glory? We just said where God's glory is. Milo chola aretz kivodo. God's glory fills the whole world. So why are you asking this now? Why do the angels have to actually ask, where is the place of God's glory? Thought we just said it. The rabbis underscore here, they answer this question. Why do the angels have to ask? By underscoring the limitations of angels. Unlike every other previous expression of Judaism, in the biblical and temple periods, the rabbinic period parts ways on understanding of angels to say that human beings are superior to angels. Before that, angels were always superior to human beings in the temple and biblical periods. But in the post-temple, the rabbis declared that potentially even the people of Israel can go higher. Why? One answer is the angels have no yetzer hara. They have no evil inclination. They don't have to do, they're just naturally good. They just do what they're told. And so they don't get as much credit for overcoming their yetzer hara and transforming those energies into good. Those people that achieve that, elevating their baser passion, exceeds the level of the angels. And therefore, because human beings can exceed the level of angels, we actually have the power to crown God and make God immanent on earth. When human beings hold the divine command, when they keep the divine command, they extend the divine rule throughout the world. Angels have no choice. They just do what they are told and they get no credit. So when we say kavodo male olam, God's glory fills the whole universe, how does that happen? How does God's glory fill the universe? Through you, through me, through all of us. And so the angels are asking, because they're not us, aye mekom kavodo, where is God's glory? The rabbis extend this idea and they say that, just a side note, they say that humans are superior to angels because angels only praise God once a day, humans do it all day long. The angels need 3 words before they say God's name, kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. Then they say Adonai. We just need 2. We say Shema Yisrael, Adonai, just 2. So we're better that way. And the angels, before they praise God, the angels have to wait for Israel to do it. Those are rabbinic answers. But the most important piece is what I was saying before. The text is teaching that God's power and rule is ultimately manifest in the world through us, through human compliance. And if you teach this to kids, you say, who's more powerful, the general or his or her soldiers? Well, if a general just barks orders at soldiers and they don't comply, well, the general is impotent. General has no power to move the troops. But if the soldiers comply with the general's order, the general's power extends to wherever any of the soldiers are, because they are fulfilling the general's command. And it's the same thing with us. If we are being good people, if we are doing gimilut chasadim, if we are living well and kind and integrity and with respect and so on and so forth, living our midot and fulfilling our ritual mitzvot, well, we are the ones that are actually making God's command imminent on earth. And it's actually, back to the Messiah thing, it's actually us who's bringing the Messiah. At least that's one way I like to think about it. Let's continue, line 5. Mim komohu yifen berachamim. From your place, God will turn in mercy and he will have grace. V'yachon am yachadim. When does God bring mercy and when is God's name unified? V'yachon am yachadim. Shemo, when is God's name unified? Erev vavoker, in the morning and in the evening. B'chol yom tamid, every single day, forever. Pa'amayim, twice a day. What do we say in the evening and the morning? When do we unify God's name? Be'ahava shema omrim. We unify God's name in love when we say the Shema. The Shema is a prayer that's enveloped in love. The blessing before Shema is Ohev Amo Yisrael. Be'ahava, right? God loves people. God loves the human beings. God loves Jewish people. And we say the Shema twice a day. That's when we unify God's name. So the next line, new verse, unified, we all know it. It's the most popular verse in all of the Jewish tradition, all of Torah, from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verse 4, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu. What is that doing? It is accepting God's sovereignty. And so what does the next line say? Now that we've accepted God's sovereignty, we say, he is our God, he is our Father, he is our King, Malkeinu, Hu Moshienu, this is a new one, he is our Redeemer, because this is about Mashiach. This is about being redeemed. The Hu Yashmienu Barachmav, he will redeem us in mercy. Sheni, that's fascinating. God's going to redeem us, Sheni, Shnayim, a second time. When was the first time? The Exodus from Egypt, of course. We know God has mercy. We know God can redeem us. We were redeemed out of Egypt. It'll happen again. This time it'll be a messianic one. Le'enei kol chai, before all the eyes of all who are living, liot lachem l'Elohim, to be for them as a God. And what do you say? Ani Adonai Elohechem. I am. That's when God will say, "I am Adonai, your God." Where is that from, by the way? That is the last verse of the Shema, the last paragraph of the Shema, right? Which is the last paragraph. Ani Adonai, Adonai Elohechem emet. Right? It ends with that particular verse, and that last paragraph is all about the redemption of the people Israel. And so there again, you have that refrain of the Shema and the Kedusha coming together. Okay? Just checking my notes. Of course, it still has that last line, line 10 from Psalms, which means forever. And so you see here, you see the bridging of above, below, the consecration of our unifying God as sovereign over the world through the Shema, the angels unifying God's sovereignty through the from the verse from Isaiah, Kadosh, 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 us coming together back and forth, and for all time, coronating God as King. And this is important because we need to recognize, A, that God is our King and Redeemer and our Father, our parent, but also that God's command and God's will is ultimately only fulfilled on earth by us playing our part. We can't wait for angels to do it alone. That's already happening. We need to bring God's vision down here, and we remind ourselves at least twice a day, and on Shabbos even more. I'll stop here. We have a few minutes for responses, comments, questions, so feel free to unmute and reflect. All right. Did anybody learn anything new today? What did you learn that's different? Anything surprise you? Yeah, Judy.
I learned something that I have always just repeated by rote.
Yeah. I guess I'll say one last thing. Whether or this stuff about the angels, I don't know what you all believe about angels, or if you believe in angels, what you believe about angels. But what I think the Kedusha tries to do here with this imagery, and now that you're so aware of it, and you see how it repeats over and over, is what it does, whether you accept it or not, is it evokes the mystery and awe of what the world and life brings to us. There are things beyond our comprehension and imagination. And especially in the time of COVID, by the way, and yeah, I got my first vaccine shot today, and hooray for science. But at the same time, I can't forget how a year ago, the world was thrown into a mass panic over something that is microscopic, over something that happened in China in a small place with one person, and all of a sudden the whole world falls to its knees. That's how small we are. That's how little we know. You know, it's amazing that, you know, with this mRNA technology, you want to call that an angel? Maybe that's an angel. but it evokes just how incomprehensible and the mystery that we live in. By bringing that imagery, and certainly for the rabbis of the time, they would have felt that.
I want to tell you, Rabbi, that I don't think I'm ever going to say Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh again, without thinking about these three things. It's gonna, I mean, I know it's weird, but just saying those, I've just saying them, you know, grew up with them. But this adds a whole new level of understanding and significance to the three kadoshas. So I want to thank you for that.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, Fred.
I was reminded, I guess would be a good word, of the importance of the human in this equation. We always do our prayers thinking about God. But if I'm not there, God's not there. Partnership.
That's right. And also that's why it's so important that they didn't just stick with those two verses. The rabbis expanded it beyond the Dead Sea Scrolls, beyond early Christianity. They really evolved this idea for us specifically to do exactly what you just said, Fred. If you did not add that Yimloch line, if you did not add all these other pieces that we see, especially Shabbat Musaf, it's not as powerful. It doesn't say it directly, but it's there. It's absolutely there. David, did you want to say something?
Yeah, you're bringing up the Christian interpretation of Kadosh, 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 made me think of something which I found very troubling. And if we put it in line with changing the names of high schools in San Francisco that have Lincoln and Washington and everything. In Prague, there's the great bridge over the river. There's the Charles Bridge. There's a statue of Jesus there with the words Kadosh, 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 written on it, which was paid for in gold, which was paid for by the Jewish community.
Wow.
And I don't know if it's still there, but it was there 30 years ago.
That's fast.
The bridge is there.
Interested to hear how that happened. Alan.
Rabbi, explain again, you said we were redeemed the first time when we left Egypt. What's the second time? You said it's going to be messianic. What does that, explain that to me.
The second time has not happened. The second time is obviously you just turn on the news for 5 seconds. You realize that the world is filled with injustice and suffering and hunger and all of those things that, you know, it's hard to even think about too deeply without struggling and being in pain. And the idea is that when we accept, and you've probably heard this before, the notion of the Shema, when you accept that there is a God and that God is the only God and the most powerful God, and that it is incumbent on us to bring God's will forth in the world, which we believe is good and righteous and just and compassionate, then we will know. Once we see that, the idea in Judaism is that that begins in Zion and Jerusalem. You have a center, and then you have a periphery with the rest of the world. That once that begins to spread throughout the world, that is the redemption, because that is when we will know that God's will and spirit has really filled the whole world. And that's not something that angels or anybody other than us can do, because we choose it. We have a Yetzer Hara and a Yetzer HaTov. We can actually transform evil, curse into blessing. Angels can't. That's the redemption.
Thank you.
Yeah, Tessa.
So we talk about the choreography of the Kedusha and, you know, the turning and it is the right word, because we're actually in a dance with God. And that is we need a partner. I'm not sure who's doing the leading though. So at times maybe God's the leader, or at times we are. But for me, that's a nice image of doing a dance.
Yeah, I mean, we just watched, what was it, 2 months ago, not even 2 months ago, you saw the inauguration of Joe Biden, right? And you see all these performances and poetry reading, and I mean, it's a whole, imagine that. That's what it is. And you have groups of people coming together in chorus, and it's not just us, it's us and the angels from on high, angels and different kinds of angels. And we come together, and it's through our coming together in one voice that the final coronation happens. And then God could put his hand on the Bible and swear in. Her hand on the Bible, I should say.
You talked about the 3 times we say kadosh and why and all. And it occurred to me just a moment ago that when I taught kids, I talked to them about this word kadosh, that it's not holy, but it's special or unique or praiseworthy. It's something that's so different. That's God.
Yeah.
Holy has a lot of baggage.
Holy moly. Holy
That's
cow.
rough.
It does. It is hard to find the right words, kadosh. Well, that's another one. That's another, you want to drash kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. Why 3 holies? Because you need 3 different ways to understand it. It's separate, it's special, it's beyond, it's aspirational, it's mysterious, spiritual. God represents, as you see from the words. If you want, you go to the text. Malkeinu, what does that mean? Hagadol, great. Gibor, brave and powerful. Nora, awesome, right? The text itself has to qualify it. Well, that's it for today, my friends. Thank you so much for being part. Last of the series is next week. I haven't decided what I'm doing yet, so that'll be a mystery. But hope you'll be able to join me once again.
Yes,
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much. Thank you.